Okay. Okay, good. Now, I don't know if this is actually going to work, but we're going to try what. Okay, for the new people who are just showing up here, we're not using Zoom. We're using Jitsi as an attempt to see if it works, because it would be great if it did. It's free. You're unlimited in time, and it is supposed to work for small groups. How small? That people say under 30, it should be fine, and I think we'll be well under 30. But I've never actually tried it, so I don't know if it's actually going to work. But in case it doesn't, you may have noticed there's two Google links, and if it gets really bad, we'll switch to click the part one first, and we're good for an hour with them. And near the end of the hour, they tell you got 5 minutes. Then we'll switch over to the other one. We're good for another hour, so that we could have the meeting on. But recording is in the past, I've been using Zoom, where there's a built-in recording facility, but we're not doing that now. Jitsi doesn't have that, at least not auto. It's not built in. There is a way to do it, but it's rather complicated, which I might do someday. But right now we're just testing whether it even works for conferencing. But as a backup, I have the Google links, which we'll use. But Google is not going to record. But I'm also trying in the background to record at least the audio part. So we'll have an audio podcast of this later, which I'll put up for people to to listen to if they want to hear it again, or for those who aren't here and can't be here. So right now it looks like we have about 8 people or so here, and most of the people here I know. To the new people, Joe, have you been here before? Can you hear?
No, this is my first time.
Okay, well, welcome. Yeah, um, yeah, and I think Kay has been here before. But anyway, so I'm going to continue to. Well, we're going to continue just chatting here for another couple of minutes before, just to give people a chance to uh, to show up, more people to show up, and then we'll get started. And yeah, for the new people, just so that you know, I usually go through some of the topics that are in the extended write-up. Well, first of all, I'll introduce the topic and everything, and I pause during the discussion because it might be quite long, and then we'll entertain questions during that period, and then toward the end we open it up to just any discussion, any questions that people want to bring up related to the topic, of course. So let's see. I need to bring up the write-up myself. Procreative. Okay. All right. Yeah, this is good. Okay. So far, before I get started with this, there are about 8 people here, which is good. I was afraid that maybe nobody would show up because it was such a bleak topic, but I'm surprised there are people here at all. But anyway, uh, uh, okay. Those of you who are here, can you hear me? Okay, at least. Okay. And can you see me? Okay.
Really well.
Okay, I see Elizabeth, Mike, and Joe, but that's fine. You don't have to show your face or talk or anything, but just want to know that I can see you and you guys can hear me. All right, so let's get started. First of all, welcome to all of you, especially the new people. This is the Philosophy Club, and the topic today is procreation ethics and extinction. I'm not absolutely sure we're ever going to get to the whole thing today, but that's okay. If it really don't get near there, at some point we may have a part 3 on this topic. It'll maybe a couple of months off or so. But I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. So let's see. Where did I put a little note here. Looking at my presentation notes. Where are they? Here. Um, Sorry, I'm not better prepared because I got here just in time to start this. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. This is a really part two of a three-part topic. For those of you who were here last time, and I'm not sure that many of people here were here last time. Mike was here, of course, but anyway, you can find there should be a video of that up on YouTube, and it's posted in the link to it is posted in the comments to the last past write-up, and as well as the extended write-up for it, where there's tons of references there. And in that first part, we talked about David Benatar, some of his critics, and some other issues introductory issues related to antinatalism as it's being discussed these days um, uh, by philosophers and their critics, and philosophers themselves are highly critical of each other, so there's a lot of controversy there. But David Benatar, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, back in 2006, I think, published a book called Better Never to Have Been, which kind of revived the antinatalism debate, pronatalism / antinatalism debate. Although in the idea of antinatalism, at least the sentiment of it has been around since ancient times, even prehistoric times probably. It's all over the Bible, actually, in the Old Testament, but it's recurred. There have been waves of it in history and waves of counter waves that antagonistic to it as well. And that video actually that I posted in the comments to the description to today's topic, which I got from Elizabeth, is a review of a book recently published that kind of details all that stuff. So I highly recommend it. It's a pretty good review. And the book, by the way, if you want it, you can get downloaded for free. There's a link to it on the video. It's by Amanda Sukanik and Mati, what's his last name? Heiser or Hey, I forget what it is. It starts with an Hay something. Anyway, it's a nice introduction to the whole history and ideas and controversies around antinatalism, and I highly recommend it if you want to pursue that. But last time, briefly, I'm not going to go over the stuff we talked about last time, except to say that what we talked about, the themes were. Benatar is famous for his asymmetry argument. And what is asymmetry? It's the idea that you can't really trade off harms and benefits. You can't make up for harms you're doing or that you experience by doing good things to make up for them. That's sort of an economic relationship that can it's certainly not, and we're going to focus on this today, when there's no consent between the parties. Obviously, if you go to a store and you pay money for something, it's a consensual transaction. But when there is no consent between one party and the other, I can't go along and go to your house or steal your car and bring it back the next day with a better car, a brand new car, and say, look, I made up for what I did yesterday. I can do it, and you might actually be happy with the consequence, but that doesn't make what I did right. It's still illegal. I could still be prosecuted, and most people would say, unless, of course, you agree to this. The problem here is the unilateral causing or exposing people to harm to people without their involvement or consent, and even if there are good consequences for the person you harmed that maybe outweigh the bad stuff, it's still morally wrong. And why is that? Well, we're going to get into that this time. Benatar uses this argument. He doesn't really get into the depths we're going to go in today, but he uses it to say that when we're born, we're exposed to a lot of harm, and because people will say, well, if you're you're also exposed to a lot of good things too, or pleasure. And so many people will say that um, that although life comes with all kinds of pain and suffering attached to it, even if you're very lucky, you're going to die someday. But it also comes with a lot of good things, and 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 if you're not born, not experiencing those good things is a loss. So therefore, the symmetry argument was to say that the good things can match or outweigh the bad things. And he says, no, it doesn't work that way. Um, it is that might be certainly that might be true if you're already here, but if you're not even here, um, you're not in a position to experience the good things or the bad things. For you, it's not a deal. It's if you're already here and you're experiencing the harm and suffering that comes with being existing, then for you, it definitely there are things that could happen to you that could make it at least compensate for it, if not make it worthwhile. But for a non-existing person, that's not the same deal, because they don't have to experience any of it, the good or the bad. And since they're not here to have preferences about these things or be able to compare them, it's a mistake to say that life, bestowing life on someone, is will come with a number of benefits that outweigh the bad stuff. That might be true. Well, if you're already here, I can make up for bad things that happen to you by doing good things, but not if you don't exist. That was the heart of his argument, and there's some criticisms of that argument, and we addressed that last time. But I won't get into the details of that, but that's just what we talked about last time. I want to focus now on this time. And this time I'm going to be talking about Seana Shiffrin. She's a philosopher at UCLA in the philosophy of law and ethics. She came out with a paper even before Benatar, a number of years before, and Benatar later acknowledged her as being maybe a little bit ahead of him on this insight, this asymmetry principle. Although she isn't or doesn't declare herself to be an antinatalist, she did, at her argument, at the very least, provides a good case for saying that for making procreation morally problematic. There are problems with it. It's not a simple answer that she doesn't give a simple answer to it. She says there's a problem here. At least we should talk about it. And in that sense, and it's Benatar, I believe, or came up with the same principle or intuition, moral intuition about this asymmetry thing, independently of Shiffrin, although later he found out about hers and cited her. And so this time, what I'm going to do is spell out Shiffrin's argument, because in many ways I find her explanation to be more enlightening than Benatar's, because it gets to the heart of why there is this asymmetry. Just as Benatar, what he did is just point out to cultural practices that suggest that most people believe that there is a symmetry. For example, one simple example is the famous Hippocratic Oath that says that doctors or health professionals should first do no harm. And then what? Well, the idea there is that if you can't help someone get better, at least don't make them worse. Okay, so that you have a stronger obligation not to make them worse than you do to improve their situation. Not that you shouldn't benefit them if you can, but first, at least don't make things worse. So, for example, if there's an experimental treatment out there that might help, but it might make things worse, doctors are not supposed to go rushing to this new experimental treatment without being. They have to be very careful about this. And the first priority, according to the Hippocratic Oath, is at least don't make people worse off than they already are. And then if you can, of course, help them. And this idea, this underlying intuition behind the Hippocratic Oath, is visible in many other cultural practices. For example, if you walk by a homeless person and you kick him in the head, that's illegal. That's an assault. Okay. If you walk by a homeless person and don't give them any money, any coins, that's not illegal. You're not improving their situation, but apparently the system says that you you are under an obligation to at least not make people worse off if you can't help them. And our legal system seems to enshrine principles like that, where you will come down harder on you if you actively cause harm than if you fail to do good. Now, whether that now one could argue with that principle, and some people would say that your obligations to do good are equal to your obligations to not harm, and maybe even turn it around. But that's not a very commonly institutionalized idea. Like, we're going to punish you for not helping someone. We will definitely punish you if you harm someone. But these practices and many others in human civilization, according to Benatar, are rooted in this deep moral intuition that we do make a difference between the harm, the wrongness of causing harm is a greater harm than the wrongness of failing to do good. Okay, but Shiffrin digs a little deeper into this idea, and I think that's why I find her views a little bit more enlightening. I want to talk about that, and then I want to talk about a criticism, this is today, a criticism of this whole antinatalist, pronatalist debate from a different philosopher named Nicholas Smyth, who I think makes a very good point. In the end, though, his point doesn't really come down on either side. It just rubs our nose in a certain reality about being alive and being people in the world, and I think we need to address that. And then... yeah, and then we'll go there. I'm not gonna. We'll see where we go after that. But first, I want to go back to Shiffrin and talk about her her argument. Okay, she's not an antinatalist, but she definitely has qualms with the idea of we need to think about what we're doing when we're bringing people into the world. The problem she sees is this. Let me read, I'm going to quote, this is from the extended write-up, and you can read it if you want to. It's on page 3, but I'll read it aloud. This is from her paper. And well, I'll explain that in a moment, but let me just read what she says. Harm involves conditions that generate a significant chasm or conflict between one's will and one's experience, one's life more broadly understood, and one's circumstances. Although harms differ from one another in various ways, all have in common that they render the agents or a significant or close aspect of their lived experience like that of an endurer as opposed to that of an active agent, genuinely engaged with her circumstances, who selects or endorses or identifies with the main components of her life. Okay, this is very like a typical analytic philosopher. What she's getting at there is that when you harm someone, you're making them into an object and a plaything at your, you are unilaterally robbing them of their autonomy. And that's the real wrongness of harm. It isn't necessarily the consequences. It's possible that you could cause harm to someone, and the actual consequences of your harm may end up, when all is said and done and all the pros and cons are added up, may even consequentially benefit the person you supposedly harm. But, she says, it's still wrong to do so because you've made them into a passive endurer of these things rather than an active agent. In other words, it's very different if you agreed to this, whatever it is that caused you harm, as far as you, the victim on the receiving end of this. If you agreed to it, if it's a risk that you agreed with the person who caused it to you to do this to you, it's a very different thing. But real harm happens when there's no cooperation from you. It's being done, decisions are being made that are going to affect you in a non-trivial way that you had no voice or choice in. She goes on to say, typically harm involves the imposition of a state or condition that directly or indirectly obstructs, prevents, frustrates, or undoes an agent's cognizant interaction with her circumstances or her efforts to fashion a life within them that is distinctively and authentically hers, as more than merely that which must be watched, marked, endured, or undergone. To be harmed primarily involves the imposition of conditions from which the person undergoing them is reasonably alienated and which are strongly at odds with the conditions she would rationally will. Also, harm states may be ones that preclude her removing herself from or averting such conditions. I want to give some. This is all very abstract. I'm going to give some really concrete thought experiment examples of this. And I'll do it right now. Consider this first situation. You have a toddler, a 2 or 3 year old, who's playing in its parents' bedroom, unattended, and there is a loaded pistol in the bottom drawer of a dresser in that room, and nothing happens. The child doesn't find the pistol. The parents come in. The child continues to grow up, like never even knows that there ever was a pistol in the bottom drawer. Was any harm done in that situation? Most people would say no, nothing bad came of it. No physical harm that happened. We could imagine something happened, but it didn't. So there's a distinct. Okay, the distinction I want to make here is between harm and being harmed and being wronged. Harm is in everyday speech, the two terms are kind of interchangeable sometimes, but in moral philosophy, they do have a distinct meaning. Harm means some kind of material, tangible, either physical, emotional, or psychological damage you're doing someone that they can experience and that anybody else can see. It's, if the child had found the gun and shot itself, that would be very real physical damage. But being wronged doesn't require that at all. Being wronged is what Shiffrin is talking about. It means what's being wronged is when you were put endangered, for example, without your consent. In the case I just described, the child was not harmed, but you could make a case to say the child was wronged because it was put in a position of potential danger. There was a risk that something really bad could have happened. It didn't happen, but the child was wrong. Something went wrong in that picture, in that scenario. If it was discovered, for example, in some there is actually a crime called reckless endangerment, even though nothing happened. But to put a child in a position where something very easily could have happened is actually illegal in some jurisdictions. So that means that the law recognizes the fact that you can be wronged even though nothing bad happened to you. Let me give a second. I'll build up to a controversial example in a minute. A second example is, imagine a peeping Tom who puts a video camera in a dressing room of a department store and films people in various states undress. He never does anything except for his own personal enjoyment or titillation, but he doesn't use this video to blackmail anyone or to harm anyone's reputation. He never tells anyone that he did this. He is never caught. He keeps the tape for a while and maybe even eventually destroys it. Okay, did any harm happen to those people who were filmed unknowingly? No, because they never even knew it happened. No one ever knew it happened except him. So no harm done, so to speak, in that case. But were the people wronged? And most legal or ethical scholars would say yes, they were harmed. Whether or not it would ever result in any harm is a separate question. Why? Because most people assume they have a right to privacy in some situations, and that would be one. And somebody unilaterally decided to invade that right without, obviously, their consent. And that was enough to make it wrong, even if it's never caught and no actual harm happens. Okay, now I'm going to come to, I think, a much more controversial one, but in which the same principle applies. I described this in great detail in the appendix of the write-up, but I may sketch it out now. But it involves rape. Suppose that a 14-year-old girl wants to have a child desperately. Legally, no male who impregnated her could do so legally. They'd be charged with statutory rape, at least in the jurisdictions I know of. So she can't legally get pregnant. but she desperately wants this. And let's assume she's fairly intelligent. She knows what she wants, and she is absolutely dedicated to wanting to be a mother. But the law will, and society, everybody around her says, no, this is not a good idea. And they have good reasons for saying that. Consequentialist reasons, because most teenage mothers are not in a good position to raising a child, and at least statistically. And despite the fact that this particular teenage girl wants to have a child, and it's like her life goal. She wants it, and she's prepared to take on whatever challenges and whatever sacrifices have to be made to have this child and raise it. Okay, suppose there is an older male who is contemplating suicide. He's old. I say older because if he's too close to her age, there's actually something called the Romeo and Juliet exception to statutory rape, where, like, if he's just a year or two older and he impregnates her, it might not be statutory rape. But if you say he's 10 years older than her, he hears about her situation, and from his perspective, he says, I'm going to rape her so she can have a child, because no one else can do it legally. I'm suicidal, and let's say he is. He plans to kill himself soon. He's not interested in what the law will do to him because he's not going to be around to experience it. And let's say further that he's leaving her a substantial amount of money in his will to help her with the obvious hardships of being a single mother. And he thinks he's doing well. He's going to do an act of great charity. It's justified in his own mind. He's doing this because he's making up for the negative consequences. Yes, he knows that the girl does not want to be raped. She would prefer to choose her partner and not be forced into sex with a stranger. So our would-be rapist, or planning to be rapist, is aware of that, but he thinks that all the good things that will result from this may outweigh the bad things. He's aware that she may be traumatized physically, emotionally. She wants the pregnancy, but she may not want the trauma and to be impregnated in this way. And he's aware that this could damage her in ways, but he also believes that she will get over that. She will eventually have the child. She will be put in conditions that will make her being a mother to a lot easier than many mothers are in. And his intentions are somewhat good. And it doesn't necessarily preclude that he's being completely altruistic in his choice to rape the girl. He could do it for very selfish reasons too. But the point is, he believes, and he has some reason to believe that there's some documentation to prove that he's not crazy to believe this, that many women do want to have children. They would prefer to be in control of the situation, but even when it comes as a result of rape, most women who have children through rape are not, the majority of them do not rush to an abortion. Many do, but they don't all. There's a famous comment by a pro-life woman named Sharon Angle, I believe, who once said that women should not have an abortion, even if in the case of rape, because, as she said, that what's her phrase? She said, "If you're given lemons, make lemonade," or something like that. It's a very crude comment because it discounts the young woman's experience, the damage, the lifelong, even if. In the typical case, there is a lot of consequential damage to a woman who's raped. However, the case I'm making here, for this engineered case of the 14-year-old girl and the older rapist, is being engineered to take away all the negative consequences, as many of them as possible, and just leave only the positive ones, so that he can then say to himself, consequentially, that he's justified in raping her, because he guesses that she will eventually come to terms with and actually enjoy the thought of being a mother to a child. She'll get what she wants, and a lot of and he's making sure that she will be shielded from the usual negative consequences of being a teenage mother. Okay, now there's a lot you could argue about this and other we could bring up, but the bottom line, in the example I'm using here, all the consequentialist reasons for why rape is wrong are being removed. Can you say that, is he truly justified then in using these excuses to rape her? Shiffrin would say absolutely not. And it's because of this principle we talked about. The girl did not consent. By definition, if it's rape, she did not consent to this. It doesn't matter that it may be true that the ultimate consequences may benefit her and that she may be happy with them. That's not the point. What makes rape wrong is the removal of her ability to consent to the situation that would result. And this is not how she wanted to become pregnant. So this is a somewhat more controversial example than the two earlier ones I gave, but it still shows how this principle works in real life, according to Shiffrin. She thinks there is a real moral intuition that we all have, that the wrongness of taking away somebody's right to have control and rational, autonomous control over the direction of their life, especially on non-trivial situations. We often do things for people without asking them in advance. And is that wrong? Like buying someone a birthday gift and you buy them a sweater and you're choosing the sweater, and the person you're buying the sweater to absolutely hates sweaters and hates the color. You didn't ask them in advance. Did you wrong them by doing this? No, because it was a relatively trivial thing. But the examples I was giving are not trivial. Endangering someone's life, raping them, and so forth, or even violating their privacy. These are things that we don't normally consider trivial. So in non-trivial situations, it is wrong to unilaterally make decisions that will have potentially serious consequences for the person for someone else, without their consent, of course. Even if it turns out no actual harm comes. In fact, even if benefits overall come from what you did, from the benefits that come from the act cancel out or override the harms. Even in that case, it's still wrong based on Shiffrin's principle here. And Shiffrin's principle here has its roots in Kantian ethics. It's the view that the worst thing you can do to someone is to rob them of their rational agencies, not cause them physical harm. Yeah, of course that's wrong, but if somebody wanted to be amputated and you helped them, you amputated them on Kantian grounds, there was consent there. You may have caused them harm, but they're in on it. They're in on the decision. In all the three cases I pointed out, none of the people who were affected by it were in on the decision. And the point is that it doesn't matter whether objectively, from a certain objective perspective, when you weigh the harms and benefits, the benefits outweigh the good, the bad stuff. I'm sorry. So what does this have to do with antinatalism? Well, it's one common argument that, going back to the case of parents deciding to have children, the usual defense of that is to say that there will be good things that you're going to expose these children to, that they hope will, and maybe are right to hope, will outweigh the inevitable pain and suffering that will come from, or exposure to pain and suffering that will come from being born. Even if you are lucky enough to have live a charmed life and nothing bad ever happens to you, at the very least, you're going to die someday. And probably that transition to death is not going to be a lot of fun. So when you bring people into the world, you are exposing them to all this, and you're not asking them in advance. That's the problem. You can't, obviously, if you could ask the fetus or the as yet unconceived child whether it wants to come into the world, and you could get an answer, then this wouldn't be a problem. But because you can't, it's like, think of a case of a rape, another rape case where the woman is drugged or unconscious, and the rapist maybe could ask her if she were conscious, but he can't. So he rapes her anyway. That doesn't make excuse of the fact that he couldn't get consent doesn't excuse what he did. In the case of an unborn child, it's the same thing. You can't say, because I can't ask the child, I can't, it's impossible to get consent from the child. What you can do, and this Shiffrin discusses this, is you could say, well, but in the case of being born, most people, maybe not everyone, certainly not everyone, but most people generally, once they're here, are happy to be here. Most people are happy with their lives. Um, and would say, there's actual empirical evidence for this. There've been tons of surveys where you ask people, are you happy to be alive? And most people will say yes. Even people who are undergoing great stress and pain and suffering, most of them are not ready to give up. They'll say they're here and they're in it and they want to stay in it. And they will tell themselves, and it may be true, whatever story is necessary to say it, my life is, despite the bad stuff, I'm glad to be here. And that's a very common sentiment that you see. So you hear. So parents who are thinking about bringing a child into the world could say that most people who are born are happy to be here. So in what way am I doing harm to the unborn to bring them into existence? Well, the problem with that is this, and that's in the write-up. There's Asheel Singh is another philosopher who discusses this. There's a big difference, he points out, between whether or not you're happy with your life if you are already here, and being happy to have been born. That's a different question. Because if you're already here, there are all kinds of reasons why we get invested in wanting to, we're here, we want to stay here. And our best, once we're here, the best we can do is hope to make the best of our situation. And we want to hope we can. And maybe we do to our own satisfaction over the course of a lifetime. It must be that way for most people. Otherwise, it'd be jumping off cliffs every day. But that's one question. But the reason why that question is not equivalent to saying you're happy to have been born is because when you're saying that you're happy to be alive, what you're doing is you're comparing experiences that either you have had or you know that other people have had. You're saying, well, I'm happy to be alive because I am weighing and comparing all my past experiences, and there's a lot of bad ones there, but overall, I'm generally the good stuff. I'm glad I had a chance to experience that. So that you're comparing experiences you had or that you know others have had with other experiences that only living people can have. When you say that it is better, you're happy to have been born, what you seem to be saying something incoherent, something that makes no rational sense. What you're saying there is, I know what it was like not being born. I remember that. And I'm comparing it with what I do know after being born. And I'm saying it's better to be born than not to be born. In leaving aside, I mean, somebody might bring in things like past lives or reincarnation or channeling, something that life before birth, for example. I'm not going to be arguing about that. I'm just assuming that for most of us, that we don't take that too seriously. If you do, that's another argument. But I personally have no experience of what it was like before I was born. I imagine, but I'm not sure, that it'll be that way after I'm dead. But World War II happened before I was born. The dinosaurs died 66 million years before I was born. I have no sense or memory or nothing to compare what it was like then with anything that's happened in my life. So the problem with that, conflating those two statements, that you're happy to be alive, happy to be born, happy with your life, on the one hand, with the statement you're happy to be born, they're not the same kind of sentiment, or the question that they're an answer to isn't the same one. The second one seems to be incoherent because it's suggesting you can compare being with not being. We can all compare different experiences we had while we've existed, but not ones that were there before we existed or when we didn't exist. And that's why You cannot infer just because most people correctly, and there's plenty of evidence that that's true, are happy with their lives, that this unborn child, if you could ask it, um, would agree with you that being born is being alive is a great thing. So then why, so this undercuts that counter pronatalist argument that um, the good stuff that comes with life at least might outweigh the bad stuff. Certainly, once you're here, then you definitely want the good stuff to outweigh the bad stuff. But prior to then, it makes no sense. Um, so let's see. Before, maybe I'll pause here and we can discuss this in case anybody have any questions about it. And then I'll go on next after this to talk about a criticism of the whole antinatalism, pronatalism debate from a totally different perspective, and respond to that later. Okay, so right now, anybody have any questions or comments or you don't have to agree with any of this, but now anybody want to speak up? Or,
Oh, hi, Victor.
yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I was just going to say the example of the 14-year-old girl just seems a cut and dry to me. Like, I can't really, because there's so many other implications beyond just the act of rape that are potentially harmful. Like, for example, her body potentially, adolescent pregnancies quite often end in harm to the mother because the body's not ready. That intergenerationally, she might not be equipped to be a mum, so could harm her child. The child might be stigmatized because of being a child born of rape, etc., etc. So it goes way beyond just removing the moral dilemmas around rape. To me, that example, yeah.
Well, that's a good point, and actually, what you're saying is part of the reason I think why there exists such a thing as statutory rape, because most societies think, or at least those that I know about, think that a 14-year-old girl simply is not mature enough or able to understand what she's getting into to get pregnant at 14. If and we just assume that's the case. Now, the real fact of the matter is, though, that there are 14-year-old girls who are not stupid, who are intelligent and aware of what they're getting into. And there are plenty of 20 or 30-year-old women who are not. There's no guarantee that at a certain age, you're going to suddenly become mature and you're going to understand what you're getting into. Some people never get to that point. And the question is, you're absolutely right. Statistically, young girls that age are obviously bad candidates for being mothers, even older than that. Some people maybe never be in that position. But the point is, it's not. It's a hypothetical case, and it's designed to. And I specifically pointed out that this was no ordinary 14-year-old girl, but an exceptionally mature, intelligent, and aware 14-year-old girl who has just decided this is what she wants to do with her life. Now, the law says that no matter how smart or how mature she may appear to be, we're just not going to let 14-year-old girls legally consent to becoming pregnant, and that's why there's such a thing as statutory rape. Any male who impregnated her, at least on the surface, would be guilty of rape. Even if she consented to it, it would still be rape. Yeah. By the way,
you could make a similar argument there about a 30-year-old. So you could say that this suicidal guy is also 30, and he goes up to a 30-year-old who he knows really wants to get pregnant and says, I'll consensually make you pregnant to realize your dream. She says, no, I find you repulsive. So, and he decides to rape her anyway because he knows that she'll come to terms with it. Oh, she might find me repulsive for the 5 minutes, but hey, it'll all be over. So you could construct a similar argument. And I agree with the Kantian perspective is that he's got no right to remove her agency and prejudge that she's going to get over it because, he might be, for example, triggering something in her that she never gets over it. So there's no, it's not obvious that she anyone would get over rape. I wouldn't have said.
Right, right. Yeah, there's a difference though with a 30-year-old in that a 30-year-old does have options. They could get pregnant voluntarily with somebody. The 14-year-old doesn't, not legal ones. The 14-year-old is like locked, who wants to have a child is locked into a situation where she can't legally have a child anyway, unless she's raped. There's no other way. The 30-year-old has other options if she wants to have a child. Um, the and by the way, the 14-year-old girl example was actually borrowed from Derek Parfit's Reasons and Persons, a very famous plot. He used it to an example like that to make another point, but he specifically chose an underage girl because the girl is not in a position, at least legally, according to our community standards, to make any kind of decision about being pregnant. Even if she wants to, or consent or no consent, if she gets pregnant, it's almost a slam dunk that a crime was committed by whoever impregnated her, without whether there was consent or not. Now, in this case, the girl doesn't want to be raped, but she does want to have a child. What she would like, if she had her way, is to be impregnated by her boyfriend, who's a year or two older than her. That's what she would like, but that's not legal. Her boyfriend could not. Well, he'd be risking getting in trouble. Well, maybe if he was that close in age, he might escape that, but it's still a problem. The reason why the case was constructed in a way is because the so-called rapist, the older man rapist, is, first of all, he's not worried about the law because he's going to kill himself. He's completely immune to whatever society thinks. His motivations are to make the girl happy, give her her child, and to leave her with the resources necessary to realize being a good mother to this child. That's it. When his part is done, he's dead, he's gone. Society can't harm him. But he is aware that, yeah, a 14-year-old girl in a typical case who gets pregnant it's not a good time to get pregnant. And yeah, there are emotional, psychological, and yeah, even physical damage that could be done to a girl that age who, even if she wanted to get impregnated. And he's weighing that in his calculations, but he's saying that, and he has another motive. And this one you might not approve of, but it comes into play, what we discussed last time. He's also aware of the fact that depopulation these days is becoming a problem, and that he actually believes that he's helping the world in a small, minute way by there's a growing number of women who are delaying having children to the point where they can't have them anymore, and this is actually been brought up by demographers, and we discussed it last time. Actually, there's a crisis that they anticipate coming within a few generations, not thousands of years from now. That's going to be, they suspect, some people say, as bad as whatever we worried about with climate change, and interestingly happening around the same time within the lifetime of children who are born now or very young people. There's going to be a real shortage of people in their prime to support a huge augmentation of people who are elderly, and this is going to drop the standard of living across, and especially in the more highly developed, high-income countries. This is where it's going to happen first, but eventually it's going to even go to affect all the world. It's just going to happen later for less developed countries, but it's already happening in places like Japan, South Korea, Spain, Italy. And some countries are way ahead on this depopulation trend than others, but demographers are saying that depopulation is a real thing and it's happening, and they don't see a way in which it's going to stop. It's not obvious how it's going to stop, which is a striking thing if you remember the 1970s, when people were saying the exact opposite. In 1970s, they were saying the overpopulation was going to, by the year 2000, was going to lead to massive strife and wars because over scarce resources, over people starving because there isn't enough food in the world.
But they're not mutually exclusive, Victor, because you can still be overpopulated and not have enough young people to look after the old.
Overpopulated? No, it's not. It's if as long as there is a large population of people who are in their working age who are paying taxes that are helping to support this burgeoning older group, then we're okay. And that's how it was for a long time, and it still is, but it's beginning to change. And it's a crisis situation in places like Japan and South Korea. There's a great documentary about this. Now, what does this have to do actually with antinatalism? Because it's not certain pronatalists, most famously people that the ones I know about, are Jordan Peterson, for example, who's a well-known psychologist and intellectual on the sort of the right side of things, right in the political sense. Is calling calling this, saying depopulation is a real threat to the human survival, and because people need to start having babies. And there's a history about why this is happening, and it's pretty deep seated. And some would say it's a good thing that it's happening. Isn't depopulation a good thing? Isn't the stress on the environment and on people, isn't all that a good thing? That's why it's controversial. But there is no controversy that there is going to be huge challenges ahead if the trend continues, and the demographers are saying there's no reason in sight as to why it won't continue. It seems to be a symptom of being a well-off community, that the more educated, the wealthier the community is, the fewer children it has, especially in parts of the world where the countries are especially protective of their own ethnicity or nationality and aren't that fond of having immigrants come in. The U.S. is actually doing relatively well compared to that because of the huge immigration population. But places like Japan are not all that friendly to foreigners coming into there, and they're facing a serious crisis. But even if you were to, immigration will offset a lot of this. But as even Elon Musk, not that Elon Musk is a great philosopher at all, but he is right to say at some point, you got to have to ask, where are these people going to come from? Especially if the same trends are visible in developing parts of the world. Even Africa it's still doing, its population is still, jumping at great speed relative to other parts of the world, but it is slowing down there. And demographers are saying that even in the poorest countries, population control is having an effect, and they don't. What's going to stop it? Well, the only way you could stop it is to intentionally keep these countries undeveloped on purpose, so they continue to enlarge their numbers. Or if they become too developed, like with Europe or the U.S. or the wealthy countries, their population is going to drop, and pretty soon there won't be any place for immigrants to come from.
And you were talking about this in relation to the suicidal man, because another justification for what he was doing was to prevent depopulation.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Let's suppose he's aware of what this issue I was just talking about. And because someone might say, but it's not just the girl he's harming society. Bringing more teenage mothers, more children without parents, without two parents, is a bad thing for society as a whole. And he may offset that argument with one's, yes, I'm going to harm society in that way, but I'm going to benefit in this other way by helping slow down in some minute way depopulation. I'm not saying that's a very convincing argument, but it's
also because killing himself is deep.
Yeah, if he kills himself, he's automatically depopulating.
I know.
Right. But he says, well, at least there'll be this other kid out there to replace me. And maybe his reason I haven't gone into the reasons why he's killing himself. Maybe he really does feel he's worthless. He's of no value. And maybe this girl is a better person to be in the world than he is. And he's going to leave her the resources to do this. But this is a very cooked up, engineered example. But the point is, to get back to the heart of it, is to show that even despite all this, most of us would still say he's not justified in raping the girl, although he's trying to remove all these consequentialist reasons for being for why what he's doing is excusable. Going back to Shiffrin's principle, what's wrong with rape is that it's rape, that he's not doing this with her consent. Even if legally she can't give it, it's still wrong. And that's what this is all about. Are you doing something? He thinks he's benefiting her, but what's the wrongness lies not in whether he really benefits her, but in whether her participation. He's treating her as an object, as a play, basically using her in a very anti-Kantian way to produce some outcome, a consequential utilitarian outcome, improving the total amount of happiness in the world. It's possible that what he does has that result. The girl is happy to be a mother. Not every person who's raped and has a child thinks this is the end of their life. Just as every single mother is not unhappy being a single mother and does a terrible job of being a parent because they're a single mother. And there's plenty of statistics I cite in there to show that. Just to give a couple of obvious examples, the 2 recent presidents of the United States were raised by single mothers, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. They had help, of course, from family and stuff, but there's no guarantee that because the ideal is you should have 2 parents, that's going to mean that that's always going to be better than having 1 parent. There actually is statistics to show something interesting about 2-parent versus 1-parent things, especially with regard to boys or males. Boys raised in one single parent households are more likely to get involved in crime, petty crime like street crime, than those raised in 2-parent families. However, that's not if you boys raised in 2-parent families are just as likely to get involved in crime, but the nature of the crime they get involved is different. It's not street crime. They become white-collar criminals. They're more likely to become educated, and the population of white-collar criminals, according to criminologists, is costing society 18 times more than street crime. So if you follow the logic there, if you're going to be a criminal and you're going to raise a criminal, raise a street criminal, not a college-educated male, okay? Because they're likely to do more damage to society as a whole. According to the statistics, I mean, the corrupt politicians, lawyers, doctors, you name it. It's a scientist even. If you're more enabled educationally and socioeconomically, you can do more damage to society than if you're robbing a liquor store. Anyway, but that's another topic which I actually dealt with a number of years ago when I talked about boys kill and so forth. There's an old write-up about this. Okay, but let me go on to say about what I've said so far. Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. I mean, you raised some great questions, and
that's great. You go ahead, Victor, to the next bit.
Does anybody else want to say anything about this so far, though? Okay, so I'm going to move on now. I'm going to discuss. I'm sympathetic to Shiffrin's point, and I think that the wrongness of harming someone, the essential wrongness of it, is not fully explained by the bad consequences that come from it. It's the heart of it is the wrongness is the fact that you are usurping the rational autonomy of someone else to be in control of important things in their lives. Obviously, in the case of rape, that's obvious. But even in the case of bringing a child into the world, if you're making this decision for the unborn child, you're substituting your judgment for theirs. You're deciding that in your judgment, it'll be better for the child to be born than not to exist. And this is the problematic nature of procreation, according to Shiffrin. That said, she's not herself an antinatalist, or doesn't say she is. She's been kind of ambivalent about it, but she does unambivalent that there is something to consider. There's something morally problematic about bringing a child into the world. Okay, so there's that. Now I'm going to talk next about a counter. Well, it's not actually a counter argument, but I think it's an important argument. It comes from a very different direction, and the argument is about the whole antinatalist pronatalist debate here. And it comes from a philosopher named Nicholas Smyth. And his perspective is coming from what I would call an existentialist slash phenomenological perspective. The criticism is this, that all this debate about moral principles and consequences, this utilitarian slash Kantian judgments about bringing life into the world, all this stuff is very abstract. That's his basic claim. And he thinks that in the real world, when people have to make decisions about whether to bring people into the world or not, these considerations about, well, is this overall going to be good for the world to bring this kid into the world, or even for that kid, rarely come up in real life procreation decisions. And why not? Well, he thinks because in the arguments these philosophers make are so abstract that they don't give any guidance to real people in real life decisions. Even philosophers themselves, how many of them who are sympathetic to some of these arguments do they have children? And well, most of the ones that are serious antinatalists don't.